Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to pause for a second and get the audio right. Technical. Now we're streaming. Okay. No, we have a laptop. Pardon us, Congress has not been. Now, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I sincerely wish I didn't have to host this hearing today. But because our federal government has spent the last 3 to 4 years viciously persecuting thousands of Americans who came to Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021 to support President Trump, I have to hold this hearing. And in order to set the stage properly, I would like to play some video footage of how America as a whole was told to view protest, riots, rioters, the language that was spoken about them. And I'd like to show some video footage of what Democrats had to say, the complicit media had to say, and how we were all told to think about this going back as far as into President Trump's administration. So let's go ahead and show that video.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
That ain't a riot, what we're seeing right now in Minneapolis. They are strictly principled anti-fascists, and they've taken a principled stand to stand against white supremacists and white nationalists wherever they may show up.
I argue to you tonight, all punches are not equal morally.
It says it right in the name, Antifa, anti-fascism, which is what they were there fighting. Listen, there's, no organization is perfect. There was some violence.
Any reasonable person would say we shouldn't be destroying other people's property, but these are not reasonable times.
But thank goodness for the looters, man.
And please, show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
I don't care that much about statues.
Shouldn't that be done by shouldn't that be done by a commission or the city council, not a mob in the middle of the night throwing it into the harbor?
People will do what they do.
You're seeing behind me is one of multiple locations that have been burning in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Do not get it twisted and think that, this is something that has never happened before, and then this is so terrible, and where are we, and these savages and all of that. This is how this country was started.
People get mad, and people get sick of it. People are risking COVID to explain to this country that we're fed up.
Most of the major movements in American history have started at the grassroots level and at some point have turned into direct conflict with American government. So remember your history before you judge your present.
Thuggishness is thuggishness wherever it comes from politically, and we should be the first to call it out.
I disagree.
Thank you. I think that was good context to start with as we talk about the events of January 6th and then how the Department of Justice has treated people, their defendants, their families, and basically perverted the justice of the United States of America. Today we have with us Trinus Evans, is a peaceful January 6th defendant and the founder of Condemned USA, an organization that has supported hundreds of January 6th defendants and their families. Mr. Evans will give opening remarks about the unprecedented prosecutions of January 6th defendants that continue to this day. He will include testimony about his own experience, including about how the FBI raided his home and held his young son at gunpoint to arrest Mr. Evans for what was ultimately determined to be misdemeanor charges. He will then introduce the witnesses who will be joining him to share their testimony. We have also with us Jessica Rivera, the wife of January 6th defendant J.D. Rivera, a peaceful January 6th defendant. Mrs. Rivera will testify about the impact of the government's prosecution on her family. Brandy Bowen is here with us. She is the wife of January 6th defendant Benjamin Burlew, a 100% disabled veteran Army Ranger who was permanently injured while serving 7 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan from 2001 to 2009. and was awarded some of the highest honors by the United States military. Ms. Bowen will testify about the conditions that her husband is currently experiencing in the DC jail. Cara Castronuova is an investigative journalist who has extensively covered January 6th, including being the first journalist to report on the video showing the death of Roseanne Boylan. She will testify about the media censorship and distortion of the events of January 6th that she has personally witnessed. Yehuda Miller is here with us today and is an independent researcher and investigative journalist who has reported extensively on election integrity. Mr. Miller will testify to his conclusive findings relating to vulnerabilities in the election infrastructure, as well as what we learned over the past 3 years relating to our elections and some thoughts on the upcoming election. Jonathan Gross is with us today. He is a congregational rabbi and a January 6th attorney who will testify to the incredible faith in God that he has personally witnessed among January 6th defendants, their families, and their supporters, as well as his many clients that he defends. I thank our witnesses for being here today to tell their stories, and I'm so sorry that this is happening to all of you. I also want to talk a little bit about the hypocrisy of the federal government's persecution of January 6th defendants. For months on end in 2020, we saw rioting from leftists following George Floyd's death. The rioting and looting that summer caused, it was more than 1,000 times more in monetary damages than January 6th did. Yet the government has focused 99.9% of its efforts on persecuting the actually mostly peaceful protests on January 6th. I'd like to go through some statistics with you. For BLM and Antifa 2020 riots, the damages were more than $2 billion. That was on insurance claims. That was a study by Axios. But we know the actual number is much higher because there was damages paid for that weren't covered by insurance. The deaths. According to The Guardian, at least 25 people were killed during the riots in 2020. The murder rate at that time was up 30% nationwide. Injuries. Over 2,000 law enforcement officers were injured, and there are an unknown number of civilian injuries. Arrest from the Summer of Love. Over 14,000 people were arrested. According to The Guardian, over 90% of those charges were dropped. And in some cities, over 95% of their charges were dropped. Our current Democrat presidential candidate and Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, tweeted on June 1st, 2020, just a few days after George Floyd's fatal drug overdose, if you're able to chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. 2 months later, Joe Biden chose her as his running mate. Kamala Harris is also shown on video saying they are not going to let up and they should not. Sounds like she endorsed riots. Let's compare that to the statistics of January 6th. Damages. The Department of Justice estimates $1.5 million in damages to the Capitol versus, remember, over $2 billion in damages to private businesses, courthouses, federal buildings, statues, personal property, police cars, and it goes on. There were multiple deaths on January 6th. Ashley Babbitt died by homicide. Roseanne Boylan was trampled and beaten. There were other deaths. Some of them were determined natural causes, but there were not 25 deaths. I think the number stands at 5 on that day, according to the information I have. Injuries. 140 police officers reported injuries. There was an unknown number of civilians, 140 police officers versus over 2,000. Arrest. Currently, the Department of Justice, the number I have is 1,488 arrests and counting, with new arrests nearly every day. Only 2 January 6 defendants have been acquitted versus BLM rioters with over 90% charges dropped. The statistics speak for themselves, but let's look at some images. This is not January 6th, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually the inauguration of President Trump in 2017 in Washington, D.C. Here's a burning car with "We the People" spray painted on the side. These were scenes in the streets. This was President Trump's inauguration, Washington, D.C. The headlines: Washington protests turn violent as Trump assumes presidency. Inauguration protesters and police clash on Washington streets. The government drops charges against all inauguration protesters. That's stunning, isn't it? They nearly burned down Washington, D.C., much of it, committed violence, fought with police officers, caused incredible amounts of damage, and they dropped all the charges against these protesters. So that was 2017. Let's move forward. This is not January 6th of 2021. This is Minnesota in 2020. By the way, that's Governor Tim Walz's state. Here's another scene from Minnesota. Over 95% charges dropped. Headline: They've lost control. Why Minneapolis burned. Governor Walz's state. Minneapolis burned. And how did Governor Walz and Democrats feel about treatment of police? This is how police were being treated while over 95% of the charges were dropped. Protests near the White House spiral out of control again. Protesters were so out of control that they had to take President Trump into the bunker. And at the same time, this is when the current Democrat presidential candidate for the United States and the current vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris, shared the Minnesota Freedom Fund bail bond link so that criminal rioters could be bailed out of jail, take back to the streets, and continue the assault on the American people, violence, rioting, and even leading to killing people. But yet, I want to add, it's the current administration under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and their Department of Justice led by Merrick Garland and the FBI with Christopher Wray that is continuing the prosecutions, or we should say persecutions of January 6th offenders from January 6th. Back to the Summer of Love. More than 1,500 Minnesota businesses were damaged in George Floyd protest, and they expect to take years to rebuild. You know, BLM as an organization raised money on Act Blue, the Democrats' fundraising platform, and I don't think any of that money went to rebuilding those communities where all that damage was caused. Again, most of the charges, as reported by The Guardian, most charges against George Floyd protesters were dropped. And the analysis shows, and these are the facts, the Department of Justice is not continuing to hunt down protesters from the Summer of Love in 2020, is not continuing to prosecute them. Their charges were dropped. George Floyd riots caused record-setting $2 billion in damage. New report says, here's why the true cost is even higher. This is talking about insurance claims. More than $2 billion. Again, I'd like to remind you that the stats for January 6 stand at, the Department of Justice estimates $1.5 million in damages to the Capitol that was on one day for a matter of hours in the afternoon. And the BLM riots were night after night consecutive riots. But it didn't stop in the summer of love. You see, the left continues to this day. And while many January 6 defendants have been prosecuted and put in prison, some for months and some for years and some for many years, the left continues their so-called protest. Well, January 6 defendants are being put in jail for going inside the Capitol. Many leftists who are protesting come in our office buildings as recent as this year, and the Department of Justice is not hunting them down, is not holding them in the DC jail, is not prosecuting them and putting them in jail for interrupting Congress. And believe me, they have interrupted Congress. This is earlier this year with the Free Palestine Ceasefire Now protest. This is the Cannon office building. This is where my office is located, where they had to stop all committee hearings, had to stop Congress completely, and Capitol Police has to remove them all and take them out of the building. By the way, they haven't done just once. They do it frequently. Now, if you want to know who these people are, here's a screenshot of their phones. They have an organized group that organized that protest, and the name of their group is Global Intifada. There was a time in our country where our government considered a group with that type of label to be radical extreme terrorism and a threat to the United States. That's the group that has been protested in our office buildings, and the Department of Justice is doing nothing about it. My staff captured this photo of their one of their phones as they were texting one another. And the names on this list are very serious names linked with organizations that should be investigated. I'd like to remind everyone also that the words from the Democrats have been so extreme, radical, and dangerous. They have truly threatened the life of President Trump. In one of the videos that I have, we have none other than Rick Wilson here on camera. Flashback to the Lincoln Project co-founder, Rick Wilson, in 2023. They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, is what Rick Wilson said during an interview on none other than MSNBC. Well, sure enough, they tried to do that, didn't they? On July 13th of this year, they tried to put a bullet in President Trump's head as he spoke in a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. And thank God Almighty, and it's a miracle that we all witnessed, that President Trump was not assassinated on July 13th and that bullet grazed his ear. And as the result of God's grace and mercy, President Trump is alive today, and the left did not take him out as they have tried so hard to do. That's where we stand in America today. And the reason why I'm holding this hearing is because, none of us support any violence. We don't support an assault on our country. We do not support a so-called insurrection, as it has been labeled. But January 6, 2021 was not an insurrection. And it should not be labeled an insurrection. But what we've witnessed for nearly coming up on 4 years now has been our own federal government create a two-tier justice system and politically weaponize the Department of Justice against the people that were there on January 6th. And so I thank everyone for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and let our witnesses go, starting here with Mr. Evans. Please read your opening statement. Thank you.
I want to thank you for having the courage to have this meaningful conversation and share with the American people the actual facts. This isn't about the dispute of wrongdoing, criminal mistakes, what have you. This is about the overreach and the decision to treat this as if it were the crime of the century and getting reality into the conversation. My name is Trennis Evans, and I founded Condemned USA. The name's not pretty, but the reality is where we are. I'm here to talk about these systematic failures and the problems that have happened. and the reality of the judicial system that we face today. It is the two-tier justice system, as you mentioned. And I want to introduce the people that came here on this panel to share with you facts and evidence and their own experiences. We have Yehuda Miller, an expert in election integrity, information related to that, and an investigative journalist. We have Cara Castronuova, journalist who first reported on Roseanne Boylan and many other incidents around January 6th. And then we have Jessica Rivera, here, the wife of J.D. Rivera, who went to prison for 8 months for going to trial as a journalist that didn't commit any act of violence or destruction. And then we have Miss Bowen. Her husband is currently incarcerated in the D.C. jail, going through that horrible situation, and she's going to speak firsthand to some of that, but they do have an ongoing criminal matter. And then we have Mr. Jonathan Gross, the attorney, that's going to be sharing with us from the legal aspects of this. Before we get into their individual testimony, I want to share a statement with you. I've introduced myself, and I stand before you not just as a witness, but a survivor of a relentless government assault. One that has shattered the very foundation of our justice system. The DOJ and FBI and judiciary, once beacons of justice, have been weaponized to instill fear, crush dissent, and punish those who dare to challenge their narrative. In my testimony, I'm deliberately not mentioning any names because every name of the near 1,500 individuals deserves to be mentioned because they all deserve an equitable justice system that we can respect. On January 6th, my intent was to demonstrate, never imagining this act would lead to the nightmare that I live today, and so many other Americans and their families do as well. My home was raided by the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and my 13-year-old son was placed at gunpoint on my front porch. I saw the fear in his eyes, and I realized that no one was coming to help us. In that moment, I made a vow to stand with those who should never have to stand alone, to remind those who fear and abuse that the American spirit will remain unbroken, just as we fight each night at Freedom Corner here in the streets of D.C., to bring attention to the injustice that's going on inside the D.C. jail. A ruthless campaign that has left families shattered, lives destroyed, and justice discarded. We have assisted more defendants and attorneys in January 6 cases than any other group in exposing government overreach, judicial misconduct, and the lies that have been fed to the American public. But we didn't do it alone. We helped each other. And there's many groups that should be here in these committees and be able to come before you and share their stories because they have done so much for the community. The FBI, in blatant violation of a court order, tried to coerce me into working for them. They offered bribes, protection, and promises of safety if I would betray my principles and defy a court order to become their pawn. I refused. I exposed their corruption on the court record, forcing the DOJ to claim they were investigating the matter. But as I mentioned, not one person has been held accountable for these clearly illegal, unethical, and abusive actions. Your committees can subpoena and probe, but the smug purveyors of injustice will evade inquiry with what Congressman Spartz once referred to as a nice little playbook. The worst part is that my story is one of good fortune compared to the fates of many others targeted by today's DOJ and FBI. The January 6th Select Committee has acted in the same vein, engaging in deceit, manipulating evidence, and using ABC News executive James Golden, who misguided and misused public funds, to produce a video release on June 9th, 2022. This video, commissioned by the Select Committee, featured fraudulently altered timestamps, Hollywood-style theatrical tricks, and manipulated audio tracks, all designed to craft a contrived narrative, either by choice or at the direction of the committee. But who would have been surprised when the committee was led by Benny Thompson, a former member and supporter of the Republic of New Africa? Benny Thompson was a member of a group and supported members from that group to run for office for a group that was known to be on the FBI terror watch list. That's the Republic of New Africa. I was the person seen on the Capitol steps in that fraudulently altered video I mentioned, reading President Trump's tweets, urging the crowd to go home, supporting the police, and earlier in that day, I was inside the building speaking to the crowd over a megaphone. After leading the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem in the crypt, I am seen on video interacting peacefully with police, speaking intelligently about peaceful demonstrations, shaking hands with officers, and helping to clear the building ultimately over my megaphone, where police officers are seen patting me on the back and shaking my hand. Yet I got to have a nice stay in federal prison for those kinds of actions. The DOJ, following the Select Committee's lead, pursued charges that are grossly disproportionate, particularly the misuse of the 1512 obstruction of Congress charge. Judges, especially in Washington, D.C., have facilitated this injustice, handing down sentences that have destroyed lives and families. The government and media have created an environment where a person convicted of a misdemeanor in D.C. loses their career, homes, benefits, freedom. The lies pick up steam from there. The destroy on the lives of the citizens in this net political outcome, where the citizen participation is nothing short of a social terrorism aimed at conservatives. The human cost has been staggering. 4 demonstrators died on January 6. Ashley Babbitt, Roseanne Bowen, Kevin Greason, and Benjamin Phillips. No police officers died on January 6th, and that is a fact. Officer Brian Sicknick, who served his nation with honor, also tragically died in the aftermath of January 6th as it related to a stroke. But the toll did not end there. Over 20 others have died because of the relentless pursuit, including 4 unborn children as a result of flashbang grenades, early morning raids, and the stress that goes along with that situation. I want you to hear that, please, Congressman. 4 unborn children have died. This is well documented. And those other 20 deaths, the suicides that some of you have heard about, and many others, and some that wish to remain unnamed that have contacted our organizations and said they didn't want this public. Be happy to share it with you in private. Excuse me. I accept responsibility for entering the Capitol illegally, but I will never submit to the false narrative that I'm a domestic terrorist or an insurrectionist. This rhetoric is a tool used against me and the near 1,500 others by those in power to silence dissent and justify their overreach and serve their political nature. What is at stake here is nothing less than the future of our nation. Will we allow the truth to be buried beneath lies and political agendas? Will we allow our children to grow up in a country where justice is a weapon wielded against the people? Or will we stand together and demand accountability, justice, and restoration of our constitutional rights? Through the opening of these conversations that I hope this is the first of, and the entrance into a very good informational divide that has been occurring in the country that needs to be shared and corrected. To those who have stood by me, I'm honored to have you as resilient friends. And to those who have and are part of Contend USA, thank you for making this stand in our nation in these dark times. In conclusion, we must root out corruption, hold those responsible accountable, and restore the true meaning of justice in our nation. So help me God.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Ms. Rivera.
Good afternoon. I'd like to recognize what an honor it is to be able to speak with you today, though I am burdened by why I feel I must do this, and I pray that you hear my heart. My name is Jessica Rivera. I'm a mother of 4 amazing children, a foster mom to 1 beautiful girl, a full-time student, a leader in my church, an active member of my community, and I strive to be more like Jesus every day. While this is what defines me, unfortunately, people automatically throw all of that out the moment they learn that I am also a wife to a January 6th defendant. I am tarnished by a stigma propagated by the media. This stigma is also supported by the Congressional Committee, which reported lies to the American people. Jesus Rivera is my best friend, husband, and spiritual leader of our house, in which he does very well. He's a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, a wonderful father, actively serves in our community, and is willing to do anything to help people. But like me, he is also plagued by that same stigma. I understand that on January 6, 2021, many people committed terrible acts and broke the law. There was a presence of evil that day that I will never condone, and like many of you, that evil is a cloud that casts a shadow over my life. I have fought my absolute hardest for this not to define my family. Yet my children have lost friends, relationships have been severed, and our family has been deeply affected by the decisions the January 6th committee has made. Our home was raided by federal agents. My veteran husband awakened from his sleep with guns pointing at him. Items taken from our home for evidence that he used for employment, and those were never returned. My kids came home to no dad. The news sitting outside our home for days. This was caused by the hysteria of January 6th, government officials' comments, and the media. However, our story doesn't stop there. Then the January 6th committee was formed, and rather than pursuing truth and justice for all American defendants that this would affect, these lawmakers used blanket statements and lies that harmed my family. We had countless court hearings that led to a guilty verdict by a biased judge. The word violent was inserted behind my husband's misdemeanors, and he was sentenced to 8 months in a federal prison. Our babies missed birthdays and holidays with their father because of the word violent. His classification of charges was changed, and he was placed in a federal prison 6 hours away from us rather than the federal prison camp 15 minutes away from our home and our children. He was placed on the terrorist quiet skies watch list with TSA and was unable to clear security when his daughters came to visit throughout the summers. And these are just a few effects the committee's findings had on my family. All of this could have been avoided had the January 6th committee kept their word to investigate the truth about the events on that day. Instead, they told lies that have already been uncovered and released ridiculous statements about all individuals present on that day. I am not all. My husband is not all. I am a proud American, a law-abiding citizen. I vote according to my faith. We raise our children to be good citizens and to live life in this country to the fullest. My husband is a God-fearing and dedicated veteran whom, despite the betrayal that he's experienced from his country, still loves America and would fight again for her. We do not wish to be defined by lies, assumptions, or blanket statements any longer. I implore you, look into the details of January 6th. Examine the American citizens who were there as individuals. Consider the nuances and report on the truths that you've uncovered. The American people deserve to know. My faith in God has never wavered. I cannot say the same for my faith in this Congress. Please do what is right and just and restore the American people's faith in you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rivera. Ms. Bowen.
It is an honor to be here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to even speak in front of you. Just the fact that you're here to listen means the world to the whole J6 community. So thank you. My name is Brandy Bowen, and my husband is Benjamin Burlew. Ben is an American hero, having served this country honorably for over a decade. He first enlisted in 1997 in the Oklahoma Army National Guard, and then prior to September 11, 2001, he became active duty in the United States Army. In 2002, he went to airborne school and then graduated from the Army Ranger course in 2003. He has, among other things, an infantry badge, an expert infantryman badge, a ranger tab and scroll, a parachutist badge, and a marksman's badge with a grenade bar and rifle bar. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan from 2001 to 2009. And as a result of his valor in combat, he earned many commendations and awards. Among those awards were a Bronze Star with Valor and an Archon with Valor. He was engaged in over 500 documented firefights. He saw many of his comrades killed by IEDs, grenades, and bullets while he was standing right beside them, being blown up himself. In 2007, while leading a group in a firefight, he fell off of a mountain in Afghanistan. His soldiers thought he was dead, but he climbed up to join them and continued fighting with them. As a result of that fall, he fractured his back, but because he was still able to fight, he was given painkillers and continued to fight for another 1.5 years until he was honorably discharged. After his service, because of the pain, he became addicted to prescription painkillers like so many of our wounded warriors. He worked for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company as a maintenance engineer for almost 10 years until his disabilities became so bad that he had to quit in 2019. In May of 2019, he found himself addicted to prescription drugs, and was a functioning alcoholic. But he triumphed over those addictions and became 100% clean from narcotics and alcohol through his newfound faith in God and his word, and also through holistic medicine. He now lives with my children and myself on the Wyandotte Indian Reservation in Oklahoma. I'm a Native American and a member of the Shawnee tribe. He has 5 children, 2 from previous marriages. One is 22 and one is 12. And my 3 children who call him dad, as he's the only dad that they have on this planet, as their biological father passed in 2019. My children are 14, 12, and 8. He has been found by Social Security and the Veterans Administration to be 100% disabled, both because of the physical injuries that he suffered while bravely serving our country, but also due to the post-traumatic stress disorder that he suffers from because of the horrific things that he experienced at war. He attended the Stop the Steal rally on January 6, 2021, and for that, he is currently being detained in the DC jail. Because his case is pending, I will not comment on some matters of his case. However, I am here to testify that he is currently in the DC jail where no American should be held, let alone people like Ben who served this country, have no criminal history, and are not a danger to the community like the FBI and the government says. In 2021, after Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and others brought attention to the horrific conditions in the DC jail, the United States Marshals conducted an investigation of the jail. In a memorandum dated November 1st, 2021, almost 3 years ago, the United States Marshals wrote to the DC Department of Corrections about the systemic failures of the DC jail. Those failures included water and food appeared to be withheld from detainees for punitive reasons. Inspectors observed large amounts of standing human sewage, urine, and feces in the toilets of multiple occupied cells. The smell of urine and feces was overpowering in many locations. The water in many of the cells had been shut off for days, inhibiting the detainees from drinking water, washing hands, or flushing toilets. Jail staff confirmed that water to cells is routinely shut off for punitive reasons. Food delivery and storage is inconsistent with industry standards. Hot meals were observed cold and congealed. Evidence of drug use was pervasive, and marijuana smoke and odor were widespread, and the facility had a strong smoke and odor of marijuana. Detainees had observable injuries with no corresponding medical or incident reports available to inspectors. Jail staff were observed antagonizing detainees. Several jail staff were observed directing detainees to not cooperate with the inspectors. One jail staffer was observed telling a detainee to stop snitching. Supervisors appeared unaware or uninterested in any of these issues. After the report was issued, the DC local government held an emergency meeting and confirmed the inspectors' findings and even indicated that they knew about these conditions for years. They vowed to take action. That was 3 years ago. Just a few months ago, on May 16th of 2024, the DC Department of Corrections gave a presentation to the District Task Force on Jails and Justice on its plan for the DC jail. On June 7th, the task force issued a strong statement disapproving of the plans. The task force noted that 17 people have died in these facilities in the past 17 months. This is the DC CDF and CTF. It is unacceptable for the district to put forth a plan that doesn't put these individuals' lives first. So to be clear, my husband is in that very jail right now. There is still no plan to fix the conditions that the marshals found 3 years ago. Has anyone been held accountable? Was the guard who told detainees to stop snitching charged with obstructing justice? Has the Justice Department looked into this? How is this happening in our country? In conclusion, the government claims that January 6th was the worst day in our nation's history because it was a threat to democracy. But detaining Americans in these jails before trial is the real threat to democracy. Benjamin Burlew fought for a decade to protect our democracy. This country owes him a debt of gratitude. Instead, he is being detained in a jail that is reminiscent to the Soviet gulags. The issue of the jails in this country is bigger than just January 6th. Ben sacrificed everything for this country because he believes in the Constitution. Now he is suffering in a system that falls short of the values that he fought for. Thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you, Miss Bowen. And I don't think there are enough words to say how deeply sorry I am for what you and your family have gone through. You as well, Miss Rivera. I was in that jail in November of 2021, and everything you read from the U.S. Marshal's report is 100% accurate. I saw it with my own eyes. I talked to the January 6th defendants that were being held there at that time. Many of them were veterans and law enforcement, Christians, patriots who believed in the Constitution and in this country. And they were being treated worse than anything that can be imagined. There has not been accountability, and that falls squarely on Congress, and that falls squarely on this government. And I'm sorry for that. So thank you for your testimony today. Who do we have next? Miss Castronuova. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, for doing this hearing and for caring about the the January 6ers. Excuse me. And thank you to the others that are here today. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry. That's okay. I was tearing up a little bit listening to the two women testify.
Of course.
Again, thank you for listening to everybody here today. My name is Cara Castronuova. I'm an investigative journalist and reporter, currently writing for the Gateway Pundit and appearing as reporter and correspondent on Newsmax. My writing on the Gateway Pundit has helped raise over $2 million for January 6th legal funds. I was present at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, documenting events and exercising my constitutional right to assemble. As a journalist, I have experienced incredible censorship and political persecution after January 6th by the Biden-Harris administration. I was assaulted by a U.S. Marshal reporting on a January case outside of a courthouse. I pressed charges, but the DOJ refused to prosecute. The weaponized FBI paid me an unwelcome visit right after January 6th. I believe that their intention was to scare me, but after that visit, I became even more determined to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th. After breaking a story in 2021 on the Gateway Pundit regarding the death of January 6th peaceful protester Roseanne Boylan and releasing video of her being brutally beaten by a police officer on the Capitol steps, Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook removed me with a lifetime ban. The facts substantiate that this was at the pressure of the Biden-Harris administration. My Twitter account was also shadow banned, and my website literally disappeared off of the World Wide Web. I am currently suing Facebook to get back my intellectual property and have my account restored. I'm also pleading with Elon Musk to remove the grandfathered-in censorship imposed on the Gateway Pundit by Jack Dorsey's Twitter. The old algorithm still marks our articles as dangerous content when they are shared as direct messages on X. So many of us were censored on Twitter directly after January 6th, and I'm also asking Mr. Musk to please share the plight of the January 6th prisoners and the truth about that day. As an eyewitness to the events on January 6th, I immediately recognized that the mainstream media was misrepresenting what actually occurred. One of the most glaring discrepancies was the media's report that a fellow Trump supporter, Roseanne Boylan, had died of a drug overdose on the Capitol steps. This narrative did not make sense, and my journalistic intuition kicked in, prompting me to obsessively investigate further. Furthermore, I could not comprehend the open anger displayed by Trump supporters who typically back the blue towards police, specifically at the West Tunnel entrance of the U.S. Capitol that day. Again, the anger seemed reactionary, like the protesters were witnessing something that the rest of us could not see. My instinct told me the first time I viewed this footage from that area back in January of 2021. I began writing for the Gateway Pundit after seeing an article that Gateway Pundit founder Jim Hoff wrote about the political prisoners in what we dubbed DC Gitmo. It blew my mind that there were political prisoners in America and no one knew about it at the time. I immediately attempted to reach out to January 6 detainees in DC jail. I was among the first journalists to make contact with the political prisoners in the jail, and their dire situation shocked me. I immediately began telling their stories on the Gateway Pundit, our articles helping to raise awareness when barely any other news outlet had the nerve to tell these stories. Of course, we were censored by all social media and by Google, so it made it very difficult to get these stories out. My phone soon became inundated with calls from prisoners, and writing about them took up a large percent of my time in 2021 and 2022. I refused to give up until more media and politicians were aware of them. In our conversations, I asked prisoners what transpired by the West Capitol steps that made them so angry, and that is where most of the violent videos that the news media really exploited came from that day. That was on the West Capitol steps. Their accounts were astonishing. Most prisoners, each held separately in solitary confinement, told me they witnessed a female protester being brutally beaten by a police officer, ultimately leading to her death. The police violence against this woman and other females in the crowd was the catalyst for their anger and actions that day. Determined to uncover the truth, I began scouring through available videos of the area in question, seeking evidence and substantiation of what they were telling me. With the help of fellow journalist Gary McBride, we finally found the video footage that confirmed what the prisoners had described. The video revealed Metro Police Officer Lila Morris brutally beating Roseanne Boyland with a large stick while she lay unconscious on the ground. And I have video of that. It's from a body camera. It's sort of blurry, but if you zoom in, and that's the video number 1, you'll see that policewoman Lila Morris beating Roseanne Boyland, and she has not been held accountable to this day.
So just to be clear, Roseanne Boylan is laying on the ground with a pair of blue jeans on, looks like a white shirt and a black coat, and the police officer is beating her, and she's already on the ground. Is that what we're seeing?
Yes, and
just to be clear, on the right hand side of the screen.
Yes, you can see her stomach. She's completely unconscious at that point, so it's really puzzling as to why this officer is beating her really viciously, twice in the head, twice to the body. She started bleeding from the nose and from the eye, and her companion is in blue, and you could just see the shock on his face. He's very traumatized. I've interviewed him. His name is Justin Winchell. Like, the reaction says it all. Like, he is just, this is a far shot. You could see her. That's the same shot when she's beating her there. Just crazy. And this is what the January 6th, a lot of them in jail still to this day and sentenced to multiple years in prison. One of the things they were reacting to was this woman being beaten on the ground. You could hear them in all of these videos and on body cam saying, she's dying, help her, please, she's dying. And the police wouldn't listen. The police wouldn't let anybody near her. And those men, as I'll talk about, tried to resuscitate her, and many of those men are still in prison to this day. Some of them haven't even gone to trial yet. They're still in pretrial detainment, and nobody knows about Roseanne Boyland. People know about Ashley Babbitt, but whenever I tell people, including a lot of conservatives, about Roseanne Boyland, they have no idea who she is and that she existed. Some people say, wasn't she the one that died of a drug overdose? Which is so offensive, because her legacy and her family really were proud of her for getting clean 7 years ago, and she was a drug counselor. So when the government came back with her autopsy report and said that she died of a drug overdose, it just completely baffled her family, and it didn't make sense to them. Like, how did she have a drug overdose on the Capitol steps? And she was cremated very quickly. I think it was because of the COVID protocol right after, she was killed along with the others. So, her autopsy report, which I'll get into in a second, it was very interesting. Like I said, the DC coroner said she had died of a drug overdose, and very quickly the mainstream media jumped on that narrative, saying she died of a drug overdose, and they haven't corrected it to this day, even though so much information has come out, including the autopsy report saying that she didn't, another autopsy report rather. This was just completely parroted by the mainstream media, causing untold pain, obviously, to Roseanne's family, who continue to suffer without justice for their beloved daughter, sister, and aunt. Gary McBride and I were able to positively identify the police officer, and I will show you her picture, Lila Morris of the Metropolitan Police. After peeling through hundreds of hours of video, we found her ID number on her helmet. I tried to request her name from the Metro Police, but I was denied. which is against the law, by the way. I used other investigative journalistic measures to obtain Lila Morris's name after the MPD literally and illegally refused to give me the name of a public servant wearing a badge. So this is police officer Lila Morris, who was the one seen beating Roseanne Boylan with a stick. And I think there was an internal affairs investigation prompted by Gary McBride, who asked for that, but they basically just said she did nothing wrong, even though she was beating an unconscious woman to a bloody pulp. So I'll show you this picture next. Because the FBI had already harassed me by coming to my home and scaring the bejesus out of my family, I was deeply fearful that if I released this article and information on the Gateway Pundit, I would be arrested. This fear kept me up the whole night before I finally hit the submit button and sent the article to Jim Hoft of the Gateway Pundit for publishing. What other time in American history was a journalist I don't even know when a journalist would be fearful of simply reporting facts. And when my story came out on Gateway Pundit, it quickly spread through other very censored alternate media outlets. But to my dismay, every single mainstream media outlet I contacted, many of which I had deep connections with, refused to cover this story and clear Roseanne Boylan's name. They were just fearful to cover this. Roseanne Boylan did not die of a drug overdose, as reported by the mainstream media and reflected on Wikipedia. She was killed by the actions of police that day. Even after this new information emerged, none of the mainstream media outlets corrected their misinformation, and their inaccurate news reporting remains on the World Wide Web today. This is why I'm here today, because I feel responsible for this story, which I broke over 3 years ago, and I thought at some point the mainstream media would acknowledge this story, and it's just been insane to me that still nobody knows who this woman is who died on Capitol steps on January 6th after, being beaten by a policewoman. Her truth has been erased from the history books. Roseanne Boylan literally could have been me or any one of us. Her life mattered, yet the Biden-Harris administration, the January 6th Select Committee, and the majority of Congress have refused to acknowledge her life, her death, or to set the record straight. Roseanne Boylan was killed on the steps of the Capitol that we sit in today. The fact that to this day, no American, and this includes conservatives, know that a female protester was beaten violently by a police officer and died on the steps because of the alleged actions of police on January 6th is a testament to the power of the dangerous censorship we are living through today. The media still reports, like I said, she died of a drug overdose, but this was a lie. Her death was far more harrowing. And I'm going to just describe to you exactly what happened after, years now of putting together all the footage as it comes out into clips and actually creating a timeline. Capitol and Metro Police 100% played a direct role in her death, and there's no question. She was hit by a Capitol Police pepper ball, and I have the footage of a Capitol Police officer coming out of the door of the tunnel about 10 feet away from Roseanne and just unloading a pepper ball gun at close range. Roseanne fell to the ground and was crushed by protesters that police pushed on top of her. She was then beaten viciously to the head and body by police officer Morris with a stick, as I showed you in the video. She turned blue, bleeding from the eye, and died. Roseanne had marched to the Capitol with the rest of the crowd. As she approached the entrance, like I said this before, she was shot at close range. And I really want to stress that there's video out there of this Capitol Police officer that should be looked at that just came up with this loaded weapon where he unloaded 30 plus rounds of pepper balls at the crowd at head level and then at the roof of the tunnel, which was, as you know, a very confined area, only about 12 feet deep. It was packed with protesters and police. And even after being warned by another cop over the radio to not shoot or, quote, you will get everybody in a panic, this officer continued to recklessly fire rounds. That is when everybody, including police, panicked and started gasping for air. And the police were wearing gas masks and they couldn't breathe. And it was making them react crazily and just start pushing protesters out. And you could imagine that protesters that didn't have gas masks, how they felt. So according to eyewitnesses, Roseanne, including Roseanne's friend that was right by her side when she died, she was alive when she was being beaten by Lila Morris. And she was she was crushed by a pile of people 10 men deep, and I'll show you that pile.
Miss Castronuova, we just have to get to other witnesses. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. It's extremely important, but we've got to.
I just kind of show some pictures. This is Roseanne dead. This was footage that the January 6th committee had in their possession, just so you know. I know this for a fact because I know the videographer that took this footage, and they never shared it to the American public.
That was one of the other protesters giving her CPR.
And this man is, you can't see him there, his Sheriff Maccabee. He was the only cop I say that was doing his job in that area. He actually was giving her CPR and tried to save her life, and he's still in jail to this day. He was found guilty on all charges. All he did was try to save her, and every time he came by, he was tear gassed or he was hit. I'll show you the rest of the pictures, then I'll wrap it. This is, again, Lila Morris in the middle. This is the officer that beat Roseanne. She's being honored here by Mayor Bowser at the Super Bowl for being a hero. She was never held accountable still to this day. Most importantly, I just want to put a face on who Roseanne Boylan was by sharing her picture, because nobody knows who she is. This is her. This is a picture of Roseanne. She was an aunt. Her sister's kids loved her. She was loved by her family like you can't imagine. They have not gotten over this. They can't even talk about it without their voices cracking. I've made friends with them and gained their trust, and they've spoken to me at length. She was a daddy's girl. This is her and her parents on one of their many camping trips. And again, nobody knows her name. We know her name. America needs to know her name. And, just to wrap it, she was underneath this pile that was created by police officers reacting to tear gas that, should not have been deployed in a confined area. That never happens. You're supposed to deploy the pepper balls out into a crowd, never in a little tunnel where police are going to react, start panicking, and just create pandemonium and trampling. And that's what happened to her. I wanted to say in closing that her autopsy report was withheld from her family, and they had to sue. We had to get a Freedom of Information Act and a lawyer and a crowdsource to get that to them. And they had a second autopsy report made, conducted, which said she did not die of a drug overdose and that she had broken ribs and tear gas all over her lungs. But they confirmed that she did not die of a drug overdose. So we need to correct that, I think, and I don't know what the remedy is. Just maybe recognition of her life and her death, that she died here at the Capitol, and correcting of the story that has circulated the mainstream media and the government that she died of a drug overdose, which is what her legacy will be if you Google her name 20 years from now, and it's just not the truth. So I'll just keep fighting to get this story out there, and other stories, so many other stories that of January 6ers, including the Proud Boys, who were completely innocent, and it was the kangaroo court of the century. I know the truth's gonna get out there because I do believe God always wins, and we have wonderful Congress people like you four that are here today that care and continue to fight for the truth. And hopefully, the truth will come out one day on what really happened on January 6th.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Miller?
Thank you for having me. What a great honor. And thank you, everyone, every Congress member here. It really means a lot that you're coming to an event like this. It's something that every single Congress member should be here. So my message to all the other members of Congress who didn't have the courage to come or to show up next time. So my name is Yehuda Miller. I'm an investigative researcher and journalist from Bergen County, New Jersey, as well as a Republican committee member. Lots of my work has been featured in the Gateway Pundit. No discussion about January 6th would be complete without discussing the very reason why so many American citizens showed up in the nation's capital on January 6th. The American people had legitimate questions and concerns about the election on November 3rd, 2020. I will start with a helicopter view perspective on the election before and after January 6th and the 3+ years since, as well as the election coming up shortly. The least we can do to honor the people who suffered and some of them died on January 6th is to let their voices be heard. Their concerns, what they were trying to do was to redress their grievances with their government and to get the truth out. The relentless prosecution of January 6th defendants seems to be an effort to silence discussions about elections. So it is so important that the least we can do is to discuss elections more and more and more and more. Before we even begin to discuss the integrity of the actual election, we need to analyze the environment and the atmosphere before, after, and during the election. Let's start with the tone that was set in the information space by the 51 intelligence officials discrediting the infamous laptop as Russian disinformation. A free and fair election requires an informed electorate. The letter by the intelligence officials that was initiated by the Biden campaign is forever a disgrace and a stain on the intelligence community. Now we know that the intelligence community had the laptop and believed it was authentic. When the intelligence community allows for such manipulation of the American public to occur in favor of one candidate, how can we trust them to conduct honest investigations into claims of malfeasance or fraud in the 2020 election? Now let's look at what has happened in the years since the election. Attorneys who filed lawsuits on behalf of citizens with legitimate concerns about the election have been sanctioned, disbarred, and in some cases face criminal charges. Is that behavior you would expect when there is an honest election? Why not allow concerns to be litigated in front of the American people so that everyone can see and learn the truth? The legal system in this country has lost the confidence of the American people when it comes to redressing our grievances related to concerns about elections. Why were so many of the lawsuits thrown out on little technicalities like standing or latches? One of the cases that is ongoing right now in Georgia was first thrown out on standing. It was remanded back to the lower court, yet the case has been sitting for more than a year with no timeline for the next steps. At the rate we are going, election lawsuits will not be adjudicated until after the next election. So a bad actor can essentially cheat an election knowing that it will not be adjudicated until after the next one. And then they can go on and cheat the next one, knowing that that one will not get adjudicated until after the one after that, leaving a never-ending cycle, totally subverting the will of the American people. In case you thought there would be relief from our attorney generals, well, it seems that instead of investigating real allegations of election fraud, multiple attorney generals thought that it would be a good use of taxpayer resources to prosecute the alternate electors. The process of alternate electors is well known and documented with great historical and constitutional precedent, yet it seems like these prosecutions are actually a political intimidation tactic. So now, with a compromised intelligence community and legal system, let's look back at January 6th. Who benefited the most from January 6th? Who suffered the greatest disadvantage since January 6th? There is currently so much evidence leading people to believe that January 6th had some elements of a false flag operation to demonize MAGA, install a puppet government, provide an endless stream of propaganda turning Trump supporters into violent domestic terrorists, and perhaps most importantly, silence all discussion about election integrity. So now with this backdrop, let's look at the election. I believe some of the greatest concerns about the integrity of the election encompass many of the following areas: the voter registration processes and databases, poll books, machines, equipment, software, drop boxes, vote by mail, tabulation and reporting, chain of custody, and of course, making sure that only citizens, United States citizens, should be participating in the process. Each one of these subjects are worthy of an entire discussion on their own. However, I would like to just share one little piece of information with the safe and secure narrative that Chris Krebs, who is the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, he started and was endlessly parroted by the mainstream media immediately after the 2020 election. He had a narrative that everything was absolutely safe and secure, and the most safe and secure election ever. Yet his own agency conducted a nationwide vulnerability assessment on the election infrastructure for the election year 2020. And the findings should shock the conscience of the American public. The only thing more shocking, perhaps, is that the government never intended to release this report to the American people. This report was only released by Freedom of Information as one of my many, many, many Freedom of Information requests that I do. Here is a summary of the findings. 76% of entities had spear phishing weaknesses. 48% had a critical or high severity vulnerability on at least one internet accessible host. 39% ran at least one risky service, such as remote desktop protocol on an internet accessible host. 34% ran unsupported operating systems on at least one internet accessible host. Now, nobody needs to be a computer expert to know that something is very wrong when our election infrastructure is so vulnerable. To restore faith in our elections, I'm calling for the following recommendations to be implemented. New processes to ensure only citizens can register and vote, including voter ID. Hand-counted paper ballots. One-day vote in person with the exceptions of military, disabled, and elderly. Immediate and uninterrupted tabulation at the precinct level. And before I close, one last thing what I must mention is we must bring awareness to the case of Tina Peters. Tina Peters is an election clerk in Mesa, Colorado, and she was just found guilty on numerous felonies and misdemeanor charges. Now, she had a constitutional duty to protect and preserve the election records for 22 months. She believed that they were coming in to destroy the records. And in fact, she's had computer forensic experts testify that that's in fact what happened, that there were records deleted. And she made a hard drive, a hard copy of she imaged the machine, the election equipment, and essentially now she's been railroaded by a judge in Colorado. Her sentencing is next month. And in her case, the order of the judge is that even if there was a conspiracy between the Secretary of State and Dominion to delete records, that means there was a criminal conspiracy going on, and she was doing her duty as the elected election official to preserve the records, that evidence is not allowed to be entered into her case. So to me, if that's not a Brady violation when a prosecutor fails to disclose this exculpatory evidence, well, here we have the defendant has exculpatory evidence and the judge is refusing to allow that evidence to be brought to that case. So I think we need to introduce a new kind of violation called a Peters violation, which is when you, the defendant, have exculpatory evidence and you want to bring it into your case and they refuse to allow the jury to see that evidence. And with the jury without able to see that evidence or hear any information about that, they basically railroaded her and found her guilty on all these charges. So the question to the American people is, why so much secrecy about the election equipment? Why so much secrecy about the code? Why take an election official who preserved the records? I mean, that's their job, to preserve the records. Why railroad them like that? And I think we have so many questions, that the American people need answers to. So the least we could do now is just keep talking about the election, keep bringing awareness. And we have to thank Elon Musk for opening up X and the censorship, taking away some of the censorship, because now we can have a platform to discuss honestly with the American people our concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And all of us sitting before you, the Republicans in the House, and even 5 Democrats voted for the SAVE Act, which is an election integrity bill. So you'll be hearing more about that in the upcoming weeks. Thank you. I agree. Elections matter. Mr. Gross.
Thank you very much, Representative Greene, and thank you to all of you for being here today. We appreciate it more than you could know. My name is Jonathan Gross, and I'm a January 6th attorney. And to my knowledge, there are no Black Lives Matter attorneys or Antifa attorneys who are defending peaceful protesters. But if the government was arresting peaceful protesters for Black Lives Matter, I would be a Black Lives Matter attorney. I want to be brief and just mention 3 issues that the American people should know about that are occurring to January 6th defendants that could happen to any American. And that is why January 6th is so important, because it really brings to light some of the problems with our justice system. The first one I want to bring up is that the process is the punishment. The worst example of how the process can destroy a person is the story of 18 USC 1512 C2. It's a statute that imposes a 20-year sentence in prison for, quote, obstructing an official proceeding, whatever that means. This law gave the DOJ the power to charge misdemeanor conduct as a felony that carries with it a punishment of 20 years in jail. One of my clients, an honorably discharged military veteran with a wife and children, never committed a crime in his life, did not enter the Capitol on January 6th, did nothing that would rise to a misdemeanor at worst or above. He was charged with the 1512, convicted by a DC jury, sentenced to 33 months in prison. 3.5 years after January 6th, the Supreme Court held that the 1512 indictments were invalid. So whoops, sorry about that. This man will never get back what was taken from him. He lost his freedom, he lost his job, he lost his money, he lost his reputation. Nobody will compensate him for that lost time. It can never be given back to him. Nobody can compensate him for the indignity of being a prisoner when you're an innocent man. The havoc that it wreaked on his family, the toll it took on his health, his physical health and his psychological health, if you can imagine, the missed celebrations, the holidays, the funerals, what was taken from him will never be returned. And that is how the process, even if you come out innocent, the other side is the punishment. The second point I want to bring up is the catch-all charges. The 1512 charge was only one of several of the charges that are so broad that they can literally apply to anyone. Hundreds of January 6ers are charged and were charged with 18 USC 231A3, what's called the civil disorder charge, a felony punishable up to 5 years in prison. Now, this is what the statute is. Any act that obstructs, impedes, or interferes with law enforcement during a civil disorder. So that's any act, including the mere presence outside the Capitol, basically can be classified as a felony punishable with 5 years. If the cop says that, well, he did, interfered with me, that's 5 years felony. In 1987, there was a Supreme Court case called City of Houston v. Hill. In that case, strikingly, there was an almost identical law. It was a local ordinance in Houston, and a gay rights activist was arrested for violating that local ordinance, which made it unlawful to, in any manner, oppose, molest, abuse, or interrupt a police officer who's performing his duty. So that case, he was arrested and convicted of it, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that's totally unconstitutional. And in the words of Justice Brennan, quote, "The ordinance is violated scores of times daily, but only those individuals chosen by the police in their unguided discretion are arrested." So I and others brought this case, Houston v. Hill, to the attention of the DC District Court and argued that, hey, checkmate, right? It's the same law. So they said, no, it's different, because that law said to oppose, molest, abuse, or interrupt the police. But this law says to obstruct, interfere, or what's the third one? Or or impede a police officer. See the difference? Totally different. But so yeah, motion denied. But it doesn't matter because they're missing the point. The point that the Supreme Court was making is that both of these laws are so broad that law enforcement can charge everyone or nobody with it. So the DOJ has the unguided discretion to essentially make anyone a felon. It's very hard sometimes to even distinguish why a J6 or sometimes just the misdemeanor, sometimes the felony. It seems almost random. And I will mention that typically it's based on their social media tweets, and that's going to be most of the evidence in court is a battle of the tweets, and the government is going to cherry pick from thousands of tweets and show I can tell stories. But that brings to the third point. The third point is prosecutors in this country have absolute discretion. I and other January 6 attorneys have filed many motions asking the courts to dismiss charges based on selective prosecution. But the judges have denied every one of those motions. The law in this country, as it stands, is that prosecutors have absolute discretion to prosecute or not prosecute whomever they want. And that simply cannot be the law in a free country. So we have obvious problems that affect all Americans, and the process is the punishment. We have these vague criminal statutes, and prosecutors have absolute discretion and basically no accountability. So how do we get out of this? Or more specifically, what can Congress do to fix these problems? One thing is to start repealing the thousands of overbroad federal criminal statutes. But I realize that obviously takes a lot of time and is not so simple. But the fact there's a book by a former prosecutor called 3 Felonies a Day, that you don't have to buy the book. That's what it is. We're all guilty of 3 felonies a day. It's just a question of whether they find those felonies. There's a J6 attorney, a great J6 attorney named Carol Stewart. She recommends a strategy which would be very novel, but very interesting if it would become part of our system, is that when the DOJ abuses a statute or when the court gives what is maybe an erroneous interpretation, instead of waiting years for it to get to the Supreme Court to fix it with the right interpretation, and the Supreme Court, obviously, it takes years and years to get there, millions of dollars and years. But Congress perhaps can try passing resolutions on the floor that speak to the meaning of the laws that it passed. And that way, if we had a system like that, then the elected officials can begin to take an active role in interpreting these statutes. So if the Justice Department says that 1512 can apply to a person who is a misdemeanor, Congress can get on the floor, pass a resolution with maybe even 13, 14 members, and say, we say that the statute should be defined this way. We're the ones who we believe that this is what we intended. So I don't know if that would be conclusive, but it would definitely be something new in our system where instead of unelected federal judges making those decisions, it would go back to the people. There are lots of other ideas, and there are lots of attorneys and others who definitely would like to open up this discussion. And this, as I said, this is not unique to January 6th. This affects all Americans. And I want to conclude by saying, in my opinion, though, and we appreciate every single thing that you do, everybody who came here today, but we cannot legislate our way out of this. Justice will only be restored to our nation when we turn our eyes to our Father in heaven. So often, when I tell people about the undeniable injustice against January 6ers, they say, well, they shouldn't have been there. How often do we hear that? These people, they don't dispute that January 6ers are being unfairly punished. They're just not bothered by it because it doesn't affect them yet. They've forgotten the famous poem by Pastor Martin Niemöller. First, they came for one group, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't one of them. Then they came out for another group, and I didn't speak out because I was not one of them. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out. In the book of Genesis, Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery because of envy, anger, and hatred. Years later in Egypt, they found themselves imprisoned, and they said to one another, quote, "We are guilty because we witnessed the suffering of our brother when he pleaded with us, and we did not hear him. That is why this suffering has come upon us." The injustice of January 6th, I've seen it firsthand in the courtroom, looking at the juries. It's fueled by envy, anger, and hatred. and it could be stopped only with repentance, prayer, and kindness. God only asks that we seek him and that we are our brother's keepers. If we do what he asks, he will end this madness. So I thank you all for providing us with this opportunity, and I only ask that you use your platforms as elected officials to direct the eyes of this great nation to our Father in heaven, and pray that he unifies our hearts to love and fear his name, and that he who makes peace in the heavens should make peace among us and restore freedom and justice to our nation. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Gross. And I greatly appreciate you bringing into the true focus of what it should be is God in heaven is the one that can truly change us. And hopefully he will hear people's prayers. I know they're being said. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask you all some questions. I'm going to try to be mindful of everyone's time here. We usually in our committee hearings, we're very tight on structure, giving people so many minutes. I felt this hearing so important to allow you to give your statements and not impede too much of your time. It's important. This is the type of hearing that is hardly ever held in Washington, and the American people don't get to hear this side of the story. So forgive me if you guys can bear with us on time. Mr. Gross, you represent a lot of January 6th defendants. Are some of your defendants, did they not go in the Capitol is what I'm trying to say? Are they being prosecuted even though they did not enter the Capitol?
And the answer to that is there are many January 6th defendants who did not enter the Capitol. There's a particular focus that the government has on what's called the Western Tunnel. And you've heard a little bit about that today. That's where Roseanne Boyland was killed. And the Western Tunnel was just a disaster. And if there are people who were in that area, there's a particular focus, including a harshness where they will not allow them to plead to misdemeanors, even if they didn't enter that building. And they'll charge the felonies. I do want to say that basically the way that the charges work is that anyone who is in what's called the restricted area is technically guilty. And Merrick Garland, I believe, not long ago on, I think it was the anniversary on January 6, 2024, he said that they're looking at everyone. That's what they said. So I do know people who were not, who did not enter the building, in answer to your question, who are charged for sure.
And they'll receive prison time?
It depends. I know that certainly if they quote unquote assaulted officers, there's a couple that I'm thinking of, as Mr. Evans said. I don't want to mention names, but they were praying, hugging each other right by the police line before anybody had entered the building. They never entered the building, and the police officers in that case, I believe the video shows, in my opinion, surged and knocked into them. They were charged with assaulting the police. I think, Mr. Evans, you know who I'm talking about. And so there are such people there are people, I know a man who I should mention his name. He told me to mention his name today, as did many, many people. He touched the sign. There was a Trump sign that probably around, 1:30 or 1:45, big banner that made its way from the crowd into the police sign, and he touched it. And for that, he was charged with assault or the civil disorder charge, I believe. So I could name many of these cases. Yes, in fact.
But did they burn the Capitol? Did they burn it?
No, none of those people. No, in fact, I have not encountered anybody who burned the Capitol.
Did they steal furniture, computers? Did they loot the Capitol?
None of my clients.
Did they kidnap lawmakers?
None of my clients.
Okay, just checking. And did some of your clients go into the Capitol and say, "Stop the steal" or "Trump won"? Did they do that?
Yes.
Would that be considered free speech?
No, that is 40 USC 5104 D. D. That's right. Or is it D4? I believe. I can't remember the exact statute, but essentially, yes, that's the infamous picketing, demonstrating, and parading charge. Apparently, it is a crime to picket, demonstrate, or parade in the Capitol.
So on January 6th, free speech no longer was protected in the United States Capitol. Is that correct?
I'm going to refer to one of the recent transcripts from my trial in a pretrial conference where the judge very specifically said that he did not want to hear any arguments about the First Amendment in the courtroom.
I see. And then just to be clear, talking about elections, Mr. Miller, would you agree that the American people pay for the elections that are held every election year, whether it's 2 years or 4 years? They pay for it with their tax dollars. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Yes. Well, it has also been subsidized by people like Mark Zuckerberg, which is another whole conversation.
Well, no, I mean
But,
the elections themselves, ballots, voting machines, election
they
workers.
should be only paid for by the
By the
taxpayer.
taxpayers,
By the
correct.
taxpayer, correct.
Okay, so it would be right then for the American people, since they pay for the elections, to be able to have their free speech rights to say what they think about elections. Correct?
Correct.
Yes or no?
Absolutely.
I would think so. Miss Bowen, is your husband, he's held in the DC jail pre-trial? Is that correct? We won't get into his case.
It's a pending matter right now.
Okay, I see. And do you feel, in your opinion, that he will receive a fair trial in Washington, D.C. among a jury of his peers?
It's pending.
It's pending. Okay, I see. Thank you. Miss Rivera, has your husband been convicted yet? Or is he still being held pretrial?
No, he has been.
He has been convicted.
Yes.
Was he convicted here in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, he was.
Did you feel that he received a free trial among a jury of his peers? In your opinion?
We actually moved to a bench trial because we did not believe that we would be able to get peers in DC.
I see. Yes. Thank you. Mr. Evans, you've already served time for January 6th. Is that correct?
Yes, the government was kind enough to provide me a federal prison stay for demonstrations.
Did you just to be clear, did you burn down the Capitol on January 6th?
No, I actually would have been better off if I were an Antifa protester that would have burned $34,000 worth of federal property that was sentenced on the same day as me, who assaulted an officer and while on pretrial release, assaulted another officer and a civilian, and who got just probation and a small fine and went home.
You would have had a 95% chance of having your charges dropped. Correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's correct.
Did you assault anyone on January 6th?
Only the fabric of democracy, I hear.
Thank you. God bless you for your humor. Thank you. I'm going to yield time to my colleague here, Representative Burleson, and then we'll go on down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Appreciate your courage to testify and provide answers to us and to the American people. Mr. Evans, is there an account? How many nonviolent J6 protesters?
900.
There have been 900 that have been prosecuted?
Yes.
And how many?
Well, there's 900 nonviolent demonstrators.
Of how many are still behind bars or does anyone have an idea?
It was 270 something at last count. There's some organizations do a much better job than me keeping count of that. I'd have to ask them to be here for those specifics. Some around 270. There you go, 276 currently.
And we know about the DC jail. Are there any other locations where they might be held?
Yes, I think that's a very important topic because prison reform needs to be addressed because we've now seen not only the diesel therapy issues that are going on, we're still asking why in this day and age, what specific function is performed in Oklahoma that every single J6 defendant needs to go through Oklahoma, then go somewhere else once they're arrested when they're removed. So that's a great question. But as far as there's facilities right now. There's individuals and facilities that have broken kitchens, non-functioning kitchens where they're shipping in food. And this has been going on for months due to fires. We've addressed some of these issues in some of the trials. Again, why I think there's a meaningful conversations to be had about prison reform and what's happening in the Bureau of Prisons and these privatized prison systems and how there's massive failure to take care of people that do have rights.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowen, appreciate your testimony. And I understand my question, you may not be able to answer. But my question was, your husband is a patriot. He served his country. He fought for his country. He's disabled because he served his country. He had 7 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's unbelievable. And this is the way his country treats him. But what I want to say to you is that he's still serving his country. He's doing it in a different way. And he's a patriot in a different way. And I hope the American people understand that. I hope and pray that he hears that message. And so, do you have any comments about how he is doing as how are his spirits?
He's managing. He spends a lot of time. He's currently in the CTF. He spends a lot of time in his cell by himself. A lot of that is due to his PTSD, and he has severe social anxiety and generalized anxiety disorder. And so, we live in the middle of the country. We have a bunch of dogs. He has a service dog. And so his best friends are animals. He doesn't spend a lot of time around people because he has a lot of, if he's around, he won't be around crowds or anything like that. And being detained in a cell block, even though the January 6th, the pod that he is in right now, all of them are just normal human beings. None of them are criminals in nature. But just being around other people in close proximity all the time really bothers his PTSD. And so he retreats to his cell and goes and reads his Bible almost 14 hours a day, just so that he can manage, because they won't allow him some of the accommodations that he needs, to include things as minor as earplugs. He has hearing aids. They did finally allow those, but they will not pair them with his tablet in order for him to be able to speak to me. So he has to take his hearing aids off to use the tablet, because he has to use certain earbuds with the tablet. And there's just a lot of accommodations that are lacking with him being a disabled person. And they cannot and will not make proper accommodations for anybody with disabilities. And just the callousness of the system to those disabilities, whether it's a combat veteran or just a normal disabled person, they only want to throw narcotics at people if you're in pain. My husband, like I said, he's a recovered addict and from pain pills. And there's absolutely nothing that can be done for his pain right now because he does not take narcotic medications. And so he can't do the therapies that he needs as well, because without the presence of his holistic medication, he can't do the therapy without being in horrific pain. And so he's just managing with some Wim Hof breathing methods and a bunch of stretching and retreating to his cell whenever possible.
We're here to fight on your behalf and to fight. He fought for us. This is the way I view it. He fought for our country to keep us safe and to protect our rights. And it's our job as elected officials to fight for him and everyone. And so that's why I'm here and want to do everything I can. Sadly, I wish that we had more that were willing to actually fight on this. And I will be doing what I can physically, but I'll also be fighting for your husband on my knees in prayer. And you can count on it. So, Ms. Rivera, as well, I just want to say to you again, and I want to say it because I mean it. Your husband is a patriot. The fact that he's served his country, and now he's serving it again. And I just want to relay that message. I hope that you can relay that to him the way that we feel. Oh,
He's actually here.
thank you. Thank you for your service to our country. Mr. Evans, I wanted to ask, actually, I'm going to go to Mr. Gross. Would you say that this is unique in America's history where we're seeing this level of two tiers of a justice system?
I think that the juxtaposition of Black Lives Matter during that period and January 6th makes it so stark. There is in the federal courthouse, there's a little display area that when you walk from the elevators to the cafeteria, and it has all the accomplishments of the court. So one of them says First Amendment, and it has a little blurb. It's like a little kind of museum about things that happen. And it says that in the 1970s, there were the May Day riots, and they rounded up a whole bunch of people and arrested everybody for rioting in DC. And then everybody was let go and compensation was given to them later. So when the first time I argued the 231A3 charge, the one about civil disorder, I was arguing it and the judge's opinion came out, and they cited United States v. Hoffman. And the clerk even wrote, I think, or the judge wrote, and this case was the famous case of Abby Hoffman, the famous person who was arrested during the May Day riots, was, whatever it was, very interesting. So I wrote in my brief, I cited, if you see that little display downstairs, it says that those people were all actually let go. So I do believe that there is hope that at some point there will be a new administration that will look into this and end this madness. But in terms of having this ever happened in United States history, I mean, there was the whiskey revolution that goes back 200 years, whiskey rebellion, and those people were pardoned. And that was far worse than anything that we're seeing today. So I don't think we've seen this level of vindictiveness.
Ironically, since January 6th, we've seen protests happen in Russia, okay, over the war that against Vladimir Putin by his own people. And we expect them to treat their citizens the way that they do, sadly. But I can't help but see parallels, sadly, the way this country has treated people who were expressing their First Amendment rights. And to me, those rights are so sacred. Can you elaborate on how within the First Amendment, you have obviously the most of the provisions that most people know, which is freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of association, but most people don't really remember the freedom of petition your elected officials. How have there been any court rulings related to people's rights to protest? To me, a person has a right to be in the building that they own, their U.S. Capitol, when government is in office, when we're in session.
And that's what a lot of the defendants say. We believed that we had a right to be there. I have clients that say that. And the courts have unanimously said that this is a unique event in American history where the fabric of democracy was assaulted and the peaceful transition of power. And therefore, the First Amendment does not apply. And that's been across the board.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your testimonies.
I'd like to now recognize Representative Burkeen.
Thank you all very much. Thank you to Congresswoman Greene for putting this together. I get often asked in Oklahoma about the conditions, and it's so frustrating as a member of Congress to just see there is a separation of powers. There is a judicial branch, but I love what you said, Mr. Gross. My team saw me nodding at them at the back of the room. I'm very interested in the opportunity for public information to get out to tighten some of the abuse that needs to be tightened. So we're very interested in some ideas you've got, the different areas of statute by resolution or otherwise that Congress can make this right. Ms. Bowen, thank you very much coming from Oklahoma to be here today. It's really sad situation, this afternoon, in a little over an hour. Representative Burles and I and whoever else as a member of Congress wants to go, we're going to go try to visit with Benjamin, your husband, Burlew, who has a Bronze Star for valor. I mean, that's so important to note. And as my colleague pointed out a while ago, so many different times he re-enlisted to serve his country. The letter that you cited from the U.S. Marshals Service, I think it's important people to know, designate that in 2021 that this was written from Lamont Ruffin, acting United States Marshal, in writing this letter November 1st of 2021 to Quincy Booth, the Department of Corrections at the District of Columbia, and the things that the United States Marshal Service. This isn't just tossed into thin air by people who want to be dramatic. This is the United States Marshal Service who went and visited and said this. I mean, I'm quoting from the letter. You cited it. I want people to make sure they know this. The United States Marshal Service concluded their letter by saying, I have forwarded the results of my inspection to the DOC, to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division for review of potential violations of civil rights of institutionalized persons. What were they talking about? What had they seen? This United States Marshal said that they had seen, DOC staff has confirmed that we have seen that water to cells is routinely shut off for punitive reasons. You're depriving people of water in incarceration in D.C. because you want to be punitive, and anyone who uses the term political prisoners is questions for whether or not it's accurate or not. The United States Marshal said inspectors observed large amounts of standing human sewage and urine and feces in multiple cells. The smell of urine and feces was overpowering in many locations. The water in many cells in South 1 and North 1 had been shut off for days, inhibiting these detainees from drinking water, washing hands, or flushing toilets. Food delivery and storage is inconsistent with industry standards. Detainees had observable injuries with no corresponding medical or incident reports available to inspectors. DOC staff were observed antagonizing detainees. I mean, so we really do have a political thing that's going on here. For those of us this afternoon, thanks to Ms. Greene, about a year ago, I went for my first time soon after being elected. We did hear some positive reports at that meeting last year, but I'm hearing now that that's not the situation, that things have gone the opposite direction. So I'm going to go through these because I plan on asking your husband some of these questions. Something I didn't mention is that they're able to provide him with the Quran, but not a Bible. And so I want you to start with that one first. Then I want you to go down the list and tell me where the status of these things in the D.C. detention center currently exist.
So this is a pending matter. So it's important to mention on the record that I represent her husband, and so we are working with the attorney from the prison to deal with his specific issues. He has very unique issues because of all of his disabilities.
Not to be flippant, but asking for a Bible is not unique. I mean, this is something they were talking about years ago. So I mean, you cannot comment on that.
So I can only comment that I will say this, that I not only a lawyer, I also happen to be a rabbi, and I wanted to give him my Hebrew Bible, and there's a special rule that it has to be specifically from the publisher or the original source. So I had a Bible that was donated from my congregation. I wanted to give it to them. I said I could drop it off at any time, any place, just let them have it. And I'm working with the prison to facilitate that. So I don't want to say that they haven't been attentive to it. That they do have a different story in terms of what the access was. So we haven't litigated that yet. So I don't want to. I don't want anything to be said on the record.
I know you can't say anything. I'm going to jump to Mr. Evans.
Okay.
I'm going to let him anecdotally share, and then my understanding is, like I said, the Quran is being provided. They might give you the Book of Mormon, but the Bible is taking as long as for some it's 20 days. What do you know on this?
So listen, we released in this document. Contained in here is the re-education material that was provided to the January 6th defendants. And if you start reading through just the titles alone, you'll start to quiver. I did. Was very upset.
You mean this is systematic? They're trying to reprogram them while
this is the reprogramming information given to them on their tablet. Like once upon a time in prison, you would take a class on plumbing or an electrical or trade. You would do something or another language. They were actually given credit for taking classes on, may I share a couple of titles? Taking classes on information such as, I'll tell you what, I'm going to say something else. Well, Cara, will you find that section there, please? So these were re-education materials distributed to them about Trump's big lie. Well, how the election here. Oh, here we go. Trump's crimes before he called for the attack on our democracy. Donald Trump, how he has attacked our democracy. Negligence, obstruction, rape, tax evasion. These are actual lesson plans. Take a look at the tablet, ask them to show you. That were available to them in the jail. In addition to this,
So they want to give you this, but the moral standards of the Bible, you're going to restrict that.
if we haven't noticed, there's been certainly, we want to promote one thing in religion and remove another. It's been a consistent method. In addition to that, one of the you mentioned standing human feces, and I'd like to point out Wanda Patton and Quincy Booth. So those two individuals have been cited by Judge Royce C. Lamberth back in 2021 for a, I believe one resigned and the other stepped down, or the other one was fired, in my understanding. But they were cited for civil rights abuses. Denial of medical treatment and care was happening in the jail on their watch in a case, and that came back. But this is the problem. The actual, can you hear me there?
Yep.
All right, sorry. The problem is that this is consistent. It's not only at the jail. This begins with the indictment process, the charging. It starts with how the FBI conducts its investigation. They're being paid a bonus to go after domestic violent extremists. And who sets the standard for what a domestic violent extremist is today? None other than people like George Washington University, Columbia University under an Obama grant. We'll get into the weeds. I won't go there. But let me explain this to you. After your indictment, then you are held by a judge that may be in bond in your state, one of the 14, 16, 20 people that were held and released on bond, right? The judge that does this every day for a living, a federal judge, Title III judge, releases the individual and says, go home. If you don't appear, you're going to pay this or leave this money and come back. And then a single judge here in D.C., Judge Beryl Howell, the chief judge at the time of January 6th, who set the standard, the reigning orchestrator of this terror plot, managed to take over and deny that bond after looking at the same information. So mom says you can go to the movies. Dad comes back and says no, is essentially what we have, based on the same information. Then you were placed in pretrial detention, where 72% of your people were veterans and law enforcement, like Ms. Greene mentioned earlier, that where she was when she was there. Then you have people there today that are still being denied medical care today. You'll go today and you'll see a deaf man with no hearing aids. This is a fact. This is happening today. They're still denying these people basic civil rights, as you see there in the jail. I don't know what else to tell you about the facts of the matter other than we continue to deliver this information. And I thank you, all of you, for taking the time to have us here and let this first meaningful conversation, to which I pray there are many more, to expose the deficiencies of our justice system, our legal system, and what's happening to American citizens. We used to fight communism abroad, and now we have people in these United States running from it, from the states and the fabric of these United States. And then we have the people that orchestrate this kind of terror campaign being allowed to do it with impunity. As I look around at fellow Americans watching their lives destroyed, their families destroyed, their children destroyed, and all of the testimony that you've heard here today.
Well, when you got a United States Marshal saying that this is inhumane and it rises to a level that I decided. So here's where I'm going to go, and I want to kind of wrap up. Donner, Chip Roy's left in the queue here. Ms. Bowen, so that was 2021 when this letter was written. I want you to give us, from your experience, what I'm going to hear from your husband today as current status. I'd like to hear from you. Some of those things that I listed out, what are some of those things that are still current status that we can expect to see?
So if I can answer, is that we are so grateful that you are going today. And we actually are looking for you to report that because, and this I will say, is that when I was first retained by Ben Berlew, I reached out to the government right away and I said, I was more forceful than I've ever been
for January 6th. I said, this man is an American hero. He's 100% disabled. We need to do everything. I guess we're working together on this, aren't we? I said to the Justice Department prosecutors, and they were, I will say this, so callous and so cold. And I wrote to them in emails things that I was just, I won't say, but I was just very forceful, let's say. And I said to them this I will say, I said, look, I'm going to move to have him released. But my experience as a civil attorney is I would like to see if we could handle this ourselves without going to the judge. So here's what he's told me. Here's his testimony. Can you confirm any of this? And if not, are you troubled by any of this? Have you spoken to the jail? And they refused to have a meaningful conversation with me about this. And I said to them, don't do this to me where I'm going to file all this motion. I'm going to spend all this time and bring all this evidence and get ready for the hearing. And then I'll show up there and you won't tell me anything. And then the day of, you'll say, oh, Your Honor, by the way, we have with us a representative from the jail and he'll explain everything. I say, you need to tell that to me first. And they did not. And they did exactly what I knew they would do. They showed up at the hearing and we had no information about it. So me and Ms. Bowen, all we have to go on is Ben's word. We obviously trust him. The government may or may not dispute that. And you're going to be there today and you'll look him in the eye. Thank you so much for doing that. And you'll let us know, hopefully you'll see more conditions than we are able to see.
The 10 square mile area of Washington, D.C. is placed or cited in the Constitution. Congress has authority over. So it's amazing. Whether you're left or right or indifferent, when justice is being perverted and people are being treated like this, this is not the republic of our founding fathers. And so I take it very, very much. And
if I may say one last word, Congressman, what we would like to know is that we only have the public documents available to us. From everything that we've seen, the last report was June 7th, and they said that nothing's been done. We can't believe that to be true, that nothing's been done since Judge Lampert's contempt order 3 years ago. We hope that you will come back with the report to us and to the American people.
Just to add on for everyone watching at home and for you all here in this hearing, we wrote a report called Unusually Cruel back in 2021 after we went into the jail and witnessed everything that was happening. It's important to read it because it's still true today, given that 17 inmates have died. These aren't just January 6th defendants. These are people that are being held in this jail. 17 have died. So that tells you that they never improved their situation. Although you'll find out today when you go in, it's cleaned up and looks pretty for your visit because they did that for me, but not in November of 2021. We saw it when it is. Also, the reports that I was given back is anytime I brought up the jail and attacked how people staying in the jail were treated, maybe Mr. Evans, you can say if this is true. The January 6th defendants were treated very harshly. Is that true?
Yes. When the calls come in, the complaints, and the members of Congress contact the jail and address a specific matter, there is retaliation. There is well-documented retaliation. This has occurred over and over again. The people just a couple of miles from this building are abusing United States citizens, abusing United States veterans, just miles from this building, right under your very nose.
Pre-trial.
And they clean it up.
Not convicted.
I don't give a damn when it happened.
But I'm saying they're not convicted.
No. Pre-trial or convicted either way, we don't have the right to abuse United States citizens, and particularly not United States veterans that put their life on the line for this country. This is absurd.
You were abused because I brought up the jail.
They absolutely can be. Listen, I went to federal prison on the weekends. I had to go to a maximum security federal prison on the weekend. This is so ridiculous. And they bragged about putting me where they held the 9/11 terrorists in Houston on the weekend on a misdemeanor. I mean, and like I said, I'm a very fortunate outcome of this. I've had a great outcome. There's so many people that we should be talking about, like the Burlew situation, like the Rivera.
Just to make sure for everyone watching, you never attacked a police officer. You didn't cause any damage to the Capitol, and this is how you were.
I never harmed a soul.
Right.
I never touched a piece of property that didn't belong to me. I drank a shot of whiskey that belonged to me. And if drinking in the United States Capitol were a crime, Nancy Pelosi would be doing life in prison.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Okay, we've got one more question.
Look, under the guise of that we ought to control the 10 square mile area and have authority over it. Ms. Castronuova, you mentioned that there was an autopsy report for Rosanna Borland that was withheld from the family. Who was the deciding factor for that autopsy report?
The coroner's office and the government didn't. They contacted the Metro Police.
What
and
government? What
coroner? The coroner, the DC coroner.
Okay.
Withheld her report, and they had to raise. We raised $30,000 with a give and go, so that they could hire a lawyer to FOIA and sue for their daughter's autopsy report. So it was, incredible. It's her next of kin, it's her parents, and they wouldn't give them her report.
And so the media reported that it was a drug overdose. The autopsy report, I think you said, showed that there was tear gas in her lungs and she had broken ribs.
Broken ribs.
Was that the only thing that led to her demise?
They the second. So when they finally got the results of the first autopsy report, they were able to conduct an independent second report, and that report concluded that she did not die of a drug overdose. The first report from the DC coroner that was reported wildly by the mainstream media, and this is several months later after it was already solidified in the media, said she had died of a drug overdose, said that she only had a minuscule amount of Adderall, which she had a prescription for, and caffeine in her blood, that she did not overdose, and that, they couldn't say exactly what she died from, but it wasn't an overdose, that she had multiple broken ribs and her lungs and her whole body was covered inside with tear gas and pepper
From
spray.
the beating that she took from Lila Morris with the Metro Police, was there anything other than broken ribs that would be attributed to the stick beating?
Yeah, sure. Like her face was completely bleeding, and in the picture I showed, you could see. It's blurry, and there's video I provided that I could send you, but this is Roseanne when multiple people were working on her body, and she's bleeding from the nose and from the eye, and I believe that is from the stick. These are people that were working on her. A lot of them are in prison today, including Sheriff Maccabee, who was really fighting to save her life. This is the West Tunnel that you guys mentioned before, where most of the violence took place, and the two videos that I provided, you guys could watch later, will show just why people were so angry and so quote unquote violent. They were reacting to Roseanne Boylan being beaten and multiple other women like Victoria White being beaten in that area. And these guys were just like enraged and furious.
So let's just be clear on this. Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 21 years in prison for unintentional second-degree murder, third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter when George Floyd died. But Lila Morris has not been charged, has not seen a day in court for a beating of a woman, and it's on video, and there's pictures, and now there's you're telling us that there is a coroner's report on her injuries.
Right. There's a coroner's report saying that she had injuries that were from force.
You talk about a two-tier justice system in this country. Okay, thank you. I'd like to yield time to Representative Chip Roy.
I think that, can you guys hear me? My own. Well, I thank General Lady from Georgia, my friend, for holding this hearing or forum, and my colleague from Missouri and Oklahoma from joining, and then all of you all for being here in those in the audience. It's, I think, worthy of noting that the official proceedings in the United States Congress, including those led by Republicans in the majority over the last 19 months, or whatever we've been in the majority, 20 months, have not been sufficient. The weaponization committee that we established in significant part for this and other related, we believe, overuse and weaponization of the Department of Justice on multiple levels, be it things like the FACE Act on abortion or other things, but including this issue, has not been used to the full effect that it could be. I'm unaware of there being a single hearing that has been held on this specific topic or anything related to the topics that we've been discussing here. Could be wrong, but I'm unaware of one. I'm unaware of a hearing being held beyond, I think, the two in maybe House admin, which were more about kind of specifics of the activities related to the Capitol and security, police, and so forth, which merit conversation, but those are relatively under the radar. I'm unaware of others. I start with that because I believe that's a mistake. And, there are people who don't want to talk about it because think it's politically, difficult to talk about and so forth. Look, I'm a seek truth wherever it may lead guy. And sometimes those truths lead to a place that fit a narrative and sometimes they don't. But when you're talking about justice, that's what it's supposed to be about. This is an important forum hearing conversation that we have here. We had to do a similar kind of off or unofficial, if you will, hearing about 3 weeks ago on the assassination attempt, which was it's ridiculous that we haven't had more and haven't had them more quickly. So that's that point. I would observe that it's noteworthy. There's a mic here. It's noteworthy that Merrick Garland was reported to have said, I think on August 27th, something to the effect of, I think our prosecutions have made clear what we think about people who try to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power, which was not even really a veiled threat, right, in terms of the use of the Department of Justice. Again, that's not a statement of pursuing justice. That's not a statement. Look, and justice is about deterrence of certain activity, I acknowledge. But this is a statement by the Attorney General of the United States basically saying, yeah, bragging about close to 1,500 prosecutions and doing so in a political context. That's what that was. That was a political statement. And I think that merits observation. I think it merits observation that there were, and I've got my staff, we've been going over the print off of everybody that's been charged in the laundry list of crimes that they've been charged with. If you look at this and you see the pink and you see there's pink and yellow, those are the parading and the obstruction charges that we're trying to highlight and go through and look and see and try to break down the charges, as has been acknowledged here by those testifying and those sitting up here. Nobody suggests that certain people shouldn't be prosecuted for certain actions. But I would note, I think my data is correct. Mr. Evans, correct me if I'm wrong. But roughly of the 1,400 plus, 140 something involved assault or engagement with a police officer, something of that zip code. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah. So there's violence or property destruction kind of falling into one. Okay. Yeah. So they would be
and that'd be about 140 something.
Yeah, but the 140, yes, sir.
And the reason that matters is putting aside, because I can't adjudicate every one of those cases. I have to pour over every case. The lawyers do, Mr. Gross. And I'm a former federal prosecutor. I mean, you have to go through and look. Say, okay, what's the statute? Were the elements of the crime met? What did you plead to? All those things. So you go through it. Let me just assume those 140 something are somewhere in the zip code of justified, which isn't something you can fully assume, but you might, right? Let's assume those 140 something are justified. Well, that means there's 1,250 others that you got to then go look at. What were those? And I think what merits observation here is something I think might have been Mr. Gross. It might have been, I can't remember. We had a conversation here about the nature of the crimes and even knowing what the crimes are, or the fact that you have these open-ended 5-year and 20-year type crimes that basically DOJ can just decide. And so I think that merits a takeaway here. If I look at what the Judiciary Committee and what we ought to be doing in the House, as we look ahead to next Congress, we ought to be looking at the total crimes in the United States and how they can be applied to the people. Right now, I've got to bill to count the crimes because you literally don't know. We have no idea how many federal crimes there even are. So we need to understand the crimes that exist, and understand how they're being applied, understand how many of them are open-ended for the Department of Justice just to be able to decide. Because there used to be a lot of weight you could put behind the prosecutorial discretion. When I was a prosecutor, right, I had to prosecute felon in possession. I had a woman that was brought before me from local law enforcement that was indeed a felon and indeed had possessed a weapon. But it mattered to me that she was someone who was trying to get her life in the right zip code and happened to have a shotgun in the corner of her closet so she could protect herself against some of the bad elements that resulted in her having been the felon in the first place. I didn't think that merited sending her for being a felon in possession. You have to make those decisions as a prosecutor. And I think that's been largely missing here in terms of the judgment. I have a constituent who, I won't mention her name for reasons we've talked about here, about the cases and all the things, but a constituent who was arrested in May en route home from her granddaughter's presentation of a project in school, driving out in Central Texas. I'm going to be a little vague about the towns, along with other women in her prayer group who went to D.C. for January 6th. She was arrested by the FBI. And a reason was presence at January 6th. I'm uninformed of the charges yet or what the specifics are. I'm waiting to be informed on that. I'm told no water, no food, no access to her medicine for the 24 hours that she was jailed. And that's not going to sound unusual to a number of you on this point. You know, I consider and ask questions. A lot of them have been asked, and I've gone over some of the things. But I think one of the things that we haven't talked about quite at length that might be meritorious for you, Mr. Gross, or you, Mr. Evans, or maybe you, Ms. Rivera, or Ms. Bowen, is the nature of the arrests, the show of force and the use of force by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the carrying out the arrests. That is something that I think ought to rise up more in the overall conversation for the American people to understand how the force was being used. I think it was maybe you, Mr. Evans, who talked about the gun that your, I think, son was, it was a gun was directed or pointed at your son at the time of the arrest. Can you all expand either in your personal experience or in your knowledge based on leadership pulling together a lot of the people, Mr. Evans, Mr. Gross in particular, I'll come back to you ladies, about the nature of the arrest, the use of force?
Yeah. So the use of force is inconsistent with the criminal conduct or activity or even the alleged conduct. But if you read the indictments, so they're actual charges, but you go back and read the indictments, it says assault on officers. So you send out an FBI joint terrorism task force with the mentality that the individual that they're about to have to encounter and take into custody has been assaulting officers, property damage, destruction, responsible possibly even for death at the United States Capitol of an officer on January 6th. You fill their head full of this, then send them out. What everyone in this room would be able to tell you, and I think you would agree, we may not in this public forum, they're looking for another Waco. This is what they've been looking for, another standoff, another something, because it hasn't been the net result of prove that domestic violent extremists, because all these people have said, okay, you got me. You could have called me. I would have been there. I would have shown up. But they need that now to prove the agenda. I mean, let's be real. Why are you still sending SWAT teams to raid grandma that was praying inside the building? You can't justify that. You can't justify that they have denied to share the evidence and information that people have wanted. Even Congress, we still don't have the video. Still today, Mike Johnson promised those videos. Where the hell are the videos? Why do we, the people, not get to see it? And when in history did the criminals want more evidence of their crime?
Mr. Gross, can you expand on, again, that specific point about the use of force and the arrests against people, for the most part, to the best of my knowledge, have largely, if not entirely, been compliant?
Not only compliant, these are to the one people who typically we're talking about years later. These are people who've been out and about in the community who are not trying to run.
Right. I read the story of a woman arrested in May of 24. So 4.5 years later, going to a Bible study,
right?
And not in a phone call. Hey, can you show up for arraignment? Can you show up for arrested with the FBI?
And these are all people who would have been called, who would have gone in, and that's. I think that's really one of the jobs of Congress. I want to see an investigation, not just regarding January 6th, but who makes that call? I mean, we saw it with Roger Stone, that he was hardly a dangerous criminal. We saw them show up at his house. He had a deaf wife. And we have January 6th stories like that of people with children, as Mr. Evans mentioned. We have deaths of miscarriages that occurred because of these pre-dawn raids. These flash grenades can kill a person. An older person can have a heart attack. Two of them, in fact, there were two people allegedly who may have died on January 6th because of them. And these are tanks. Tanks are showing up in suburban neighborhoods. like with turrets, like tanks and long guns with the lasers, battering rams. Who's authorizing this? Why is this? And these are people, once again, who are not flight risks, who haven't gone anywhere, who have tweeted about, they were at January 6th. We want to know.
Within some degree of reason, recognizing some trials, and some charges continue, and so you got to manage that as a lawyer. Has anybody compiled the sort of comprehensive list? I don't know if Julie has or anybody else, but has anybody a comprehensive list of that use of force? Like, okay, well, X number of people are arrested, and we've got X, Y number.
Yeah, so I'll get you some documentation. So the
and I've seen some of it, but I mean to the T. Has it been?
Yes.
Like of the 1,400.
Yes.
Can we say how many of the 1,400 had a specific show of force? And what was the nature of that?
I'm going to tell you that it's at least 80%.
And can we figure out, and what do you mean by that? What is the characterization of that use of force for that 80%? You see what I'm saying?
The SWAT team, the use of a SWAT team was 80% plus.
Okay.
And I'm going to say it's much higher, but safely I'll guarantee you today that it was above 80%.
Okay.
And wait, can we add in that there's Haitian illegal migrants taking over towns, eating people's pets, but yet there's not a government show of force against that? However, it is against these people that protested the election.
Well, they're not as dangerous.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
I just wanted to interject that. Thank you.
Of that 80% where there was a show of force in some degree of a SWAT team or what you just characterized, how many would you say was of the percentage? Again, I know we're ballparking here, but I'd love to know the exact numbers if you guys have them. Of people that had it be doors knocked in, battering rams, flash grenades, whatever.
Well, first of all, the FBI doesn't show up with the SWAT team and say, "Please come on with us."
Right.
That's not how it starts.
I get that, but there's still degrees. They do show up, and people then walk out and comply, and then there's smash the door down. So
this is the whole thing: is you have the pre-dawn raid, and you have the situation there. So we can give you that exact number, and we can show you. We'll be happy to provide for you the names of the dead and the unborn children. We can provide for you all of that information. We have all of that well documented. And I just don't have the numbers off the top of my head. And I don't want to misrepresent.
If I can add one thing.
Facts.
So we ask for the body cam footage of the arrest in those cases, and we're told there is none, that they do not come with body cam, but there is documentation from Ring cameras and other things that have brought this to light. And you see it, particularly, I'm thinking of one case with an elderly man that he actually had 2 cameras because he was very concerned about security. So the FBI one man comes in and covers the camera, but he had
the other one.
So he missed the other one. So we have the battering ram knock down this elderly man's door.
Real quick, Ms. Rivera, Ms. Bowen, do you have anything to add about the nature of the arrest? Was that a significant feature of your all's experience or any knowledge you all have?
In our situation, we actually had both of like the extra force used. I mean, my husband is a disabled veteran as well. And that doesn't usually go well, holding them at gunpoint. And so being awakened from his sleep that way after my sister opened the door for them. This was after.
Okay. So walk me through that then.
So they actually knocked on the door.
Okay.
Your
home?
Yes. The forceful knock of, I was not present. But they, everyone knows the FBI, at least we all know the FBI knock. And then she opened the door for them, and then they went then forcefully to my bedroom to wake him up.
At gunpoint?
Yes.
Ms. Bowen, do you have anything to add on this front? And if you get pending trial, then feel free not to. That's okay.
Yeah.
Follow advice of counsel.
Yeah, it's a pretty painful memory. So I'll just leave it.
Leave it at that. Okay. Well, once you've gone through the trial, I'd like to know the details on that. I want to be mindful of time, just like my colleagues were. We've talked about the jail facilities. I was looking at the buckets of things, the extent to which we have crimes that are too broad and too many crimes and how they're applied. Looking at the charges that we're talking about here, that you've got, what some of us might agree were some legitimate charges for some legitimate action, but a very large number of expansive use of charges, whether it's the parading or obstruction charges. I guess one other question I'd ask to you, Mr. Gross, in particular, is in light of Fisher, what do you expect to happen in a broad statement in terms of the reduction of existing sentences or the dropping of those charges in current sentences? What do you expect in broad brush without
broad brush? I can tell you right now that, so just background is that the Fisher decision is the one that found that the indictments for the 1512 obstruction charge were invalid. And I will tell you that it's not over, because the Supreme Court did not actually strike it down. It just sent it back to the appellate court, and it's there right now. It just reversed it. So we don't know. And the government has not said in most cases, well, okay, we'll just throw in the towel. They are considering new charges. They're considering all kinds of different remedies, maybe stacking, instead of having concurrent sentences, consecutive sentences, so they can get to the same place sentence-wise as they would if they had the felony charge. So we're not done.
So that's the area of charges is important for us to look at. The nature of the arrest, it's important for us to still get to the bottom of the use of the force, the jail facilities that we've already talked about, and then congressional reaction that we're not doing enough in the official space, and we're having to force some of this through unofficial hearings. My team was working on this. I have a subcommittee, but I don't have subpoena power. So in a subcommittee, we were trying to do something similar and had some similar conversations, and we may still yet. But it was going to be more like this because for reasons that I think we need to have further conversations about. But bottom line is, appreciate you all very much for bringing to light some of the things. I'm sorry for what a number of you have gone through, including many of, frankly, my constituents, including the one I just described. Mr. Evans also lives in Central Texas. And so appreciate Ms. Greene for you pulling this together.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to show another video that I just think it's so important to keep highlighting how the Democrats, the left, the media discussed and talked about BLM protests, riots, and rioters. Can you go ahead and play that video?
I don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
Biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face!
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look, as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
That's it right there, pulling up. I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Statement from our vice president where she said they are not going to let up and they should not. And then let's also point out that they almost got their way. Okay, they almost got their way. They did. They almost got their way. And I don't think that is said enough. And that is something that is so shocking to me. When I pulled these videos and I watched these videos before this hearing today. And I thought to myself, have you ever heard a Republican member of Congress like me making those statements? No. America never heard Republicans out there making those statements like Democrats did. And we wouldn't do that. And then people that cared about the election showed up and protested on January 6th after the left rioted, nearly burned down so many communities, destroyed 93 police officers' vehicles, attacked police officers, all that went on. And I'll bring this up again because I think this is so valid. Derek Chauvin has been sentenced to 21 years in prison for the death of George Floyd, even though his autopsy report showed significant drug use. However, we have Lila Morris has never been even charged with anything for the death of Roseanne Boylan. That is one of the biggest things that is standing out to me. So I'm showing you all videos of what was said about George Floyd protests and riots and BLM protests and riots and showing you the result in this country of it. However, on January 6th, and that is what we're discussing in this hearing, a woman was murdered in the tunnel of the Capitol and nothing has been done. Murdered, and it appears, I can't judge, I can't call convictions. I haven't read any of her autopsy report, but we have a video that was shown here with Roseanne Boylan laying on the ground being beaten by a Capitol police officer. Can we play that video again? Is that possible? Alec, can we show that again? Okay, thank you. Not my video where... Nick, can you come up and do that, please?
And if I might say, there's a second video that shows all the protesters trying to revive her and the cops attacking the protesters. And most of those are the guys that went to jail that were in the West Capitol and are still in jail. And some of them haven't even gone to trial.
Just give us 1 second. Technical difficulties. This is your government at work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Okay, so the room next to us has cut our audio for our videos. Maybe someone can go talk to the room next door. So here's the video of Roseanne Boylan laying on the ground unconscious, continued to be beaten by a Capitol police officer, and there's been no charges against for Lila Morris for this. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
If you could play the second video, I think that one's more compelling because it really shows how the people were just so distraught and what they were reacting to. It's only 20 seconds.
I need compressions! Back up! Get him ahead of time! This on you, motherfuckers! This on you, motherfuckers! You kill us, motherfuckers! Turn your fucking badges! Sorry, shame on you! Look killer! Hey, killer! You're not our people! You're not our people! Thank you! Fuck you, asshole!
Been told.
I know.
This is an untold story in America today.
If you could just play the third one, just so you could see this, Miss Greene, it's really just heartbreaking. And if you could take the time later to just hear the audio on this and the despair in these people. And like I said, this was reactionary.
front, unarmed, and they shot her.
This footage this is the reactions to Roseanne and Ashley Babbitt.
I was going to say, I
Right.
think one was Roseanne Boylan, then it moved into
Right,
Ashley Babbitt being murdered.
And it illustrated in an article I wrote that the January 6th committee had this footage. I know the videographer, he had given it to them. They had it, and they played only parts of the reactions of people acting unhinged, saying, look at these unhinged, cop-hating Trump supporters, when in reality, they never showed what they were reacting to, and they really distorted the reality of what happened that day.
Thank you. Can we, you all inform me about something that I did not know about? And there's a video that you all have about the flashbangs that were used by the police on January 6th.
Yes.
Could you walk us through that video or tell us the story, and then we can play the video?
There's a number of situations. It's not just the flashbangs, it's the pepper balls, it's the rubber bullets. The misuse of munitions is holistic throughout the day by certain officers. So we talked about this earlier in the sense of sharing with you that what I want you to understand is when you misuse these munitions, it's against the usage because of safety reasons. You don't fire them from a height because they're designed to be used where you hit from the sternum and below, because for safety, because you can kill somebody with these rubber bullets. These canisters can kill somebody. They become, what happens is this non-lethal intent can suddenly become a lethal object by the misuse of it, as well as the CS gas being sprayed and used the way it was, where it's in an enclosed area. In addition to that, so where you start the day where they really screw this up is with Daniel Tao. So the officer, Thau, however it's pronounced, they make these errors in judgment throughout the day where it's inconsistent with both the directive of use of the munition, and it's a horrific mistake to fire it into the wind over the heads of your officers. So they started that process. Then he misfires one and fires it into his own police line, which is what broke up the police line and created the surge at 226. Not the lie that was told in the select committee that President Trump's tweet caused it, and me on the megaphone telling people from the Capitol steps, which was the fraudulently altered video.
Right. So let's pause here and all recognize, and I think this is so important to recognize, that we do want to have the safety and security of the Capitol. That is an absolute truth, and it's something that we have to uphold. That should have been done by the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, before January 6th. President Trump had signed off going ahead and giving permission for the National Guard to be present on January 6th due to intel threats that had come in before this day, even back into December. It's also known that Nancy Pelosi was briefed back in December about threats that were going to come in. The Speaker of the House is responsible for the security of the Capitol. That is the Speaker of the House's job. She should have had the National Guard present at the Capitol, and President Trump wanted the National Guard present at the Capitol for the safety and the security for every single person there. Lawmakers, people that work at the Capitol, as well as protesters. That would have been the most important thing to happen. Now, you're telling us a story, and we're about to watch the video of this was DC police, correct? DC police were there on Capitol grounds because the National Guard was not brought in to be prepared for that day of protests. Now, the DC police we're about to see, we're going to use what were they about to fire?
So and as you'll see, you happen to mention the DC police again. I don't think it's fair to talk about the DC police without mentioning an article we did on this and the information in the document that says that it's called A Legacy of Violence and Brutality. The DC police force is the 9th most violent police force in the United States of America, if you weren't aware. This is all rated by an independent organization. They're not a political or partisan organization. They rate police forces, and DC is consistently in the top 15 over the last 30 years, most violent police forces in the nation.
Well, I will say, having to work in Washington, D.C., this is a town that has a lot of crime, is some of the highest crime in the nation. I'm not here to disparage police officers. I actually stand with police.
I do too.
And fully support them. So we do want to make that statement. But let's talk about this video because it's on January 6th. And I believe this shows the whole reason why the Capitol Police or the police left their line that they were holding, and how police officers end up being injured because of another officer's actions. Yeah. Okay.
And well, I think, can we talk about the comparison to how police, the DOJ handled the cases January 20, 2017, and its MPD essentially did the same thing, but those people won $4.3 million civil suit against MPD, while the people of January 6th were sent to prison?
Yes, that's a good comparison. On President Trump's inauguration day, the protesters that caused unbelievable damage to Washington, D.C.
Correct.
ended up being awarded, what was it,
$4.3 million.
So somehow this city and this government makes a habit of paying leftist protesters and rioters, however, locks up protesters and rioters from the right.
Which is all the more reason that we have to have change of venue, and laws like Haldeman that were put in the books here were a mistake. These things were a mess. The change of venue work that we did shows that there's a clear bias. And interestingly enough, wouldn't you agree, Congresswoman, that if the federal government has institutionalized the idea that implicit bias and inherent bias are indisputable, that these things happen and they're beyond your control to recognize them, therefore we have to have DEI policies throughout our organizations, our lives, and making sure that everything goes as such? Why do they only want to not imply that same logic to jurors?
Well, I think that we can clearly state for a fact, based on the court cases that have happened for January 6th defendants, for President Trump himself also, you can't get a fair trial in Washington, D.C.
No, you can't.
It's a very hard left bias. How we doing? It's not loading.
Don't forget that the judges. Oh, I'm
yeah,
so sorry.
serious. Okay. We can post it later to my social media. So for those watching at home, this is an important video. It was one I had not seen until today, and thank you for bringing it. And we can post it to my social media. I think that was one of the last things I wanted to talk to you all about. Basically, I want to thank each of you for being here today. This was a very much needed hearing. We need many more of them because obviously, Ms. Castronuova, I mean, you've pointed out the extreme bias in the media is clear, where you're being censored, deplatformed, and silenced for trying to tell the truth and report and do your job as a journalist. Clearly, the media has chosen one side of the story, and it's the one that goes along with the current administration that's in charge. But thank you, and thank you everyone that came today sitting here in the hearing, and thank you for those that are watching at home. We'll come back and try to do this again. Thank you.
Thank you.